The crisp autumn air carried the sound of distant church bells as Sarah Sutton stood trembling on the steps of Redemption Church, the tiny bundle in her arms squirming against the October chill of 1876. Her tear-streaked face was hidden beneath a threadbare shawl as she placed the woven basket containing her infant daughter on the weathered wooden steps, a folded note tucked beside the sleeping baby's face. "I'm sorry, little one," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I have nothing to give you now, but someday I'll come back, I promise." Just as Sarah turned to leave, heavy boot steps approached from behind. She froze, caught in the act of abandonment, her worst moment witnessed by a stranger. "Madam," a deep voice called out, "you planning on leaving that child?" Sarah turned slowly, meeting the steady gaze of a tall man wearing a dusty Stetson, his face weathered but kind beneath a short beard. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy, worn leather chaps over denim, a faded shirt, and a bandana at his neck. "I have no choice," Sarah replied, her voice barely audible. "Her father is gone. I have no money, no home. The baby deserves better than what I can provide." The cowboy studied her for a long moment, then looked at the sleeping infant. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair with hints of gray at the temples, and stepped closer. "My name is Jackson Forrester," he said, his voice gentler now. "I own a small ranch outside of town. Not much, but it's something." He gestured toward the baby. "That little one needs her mother." "You don't understand," Sarah insisted, fighting back fresh tears. "I've tried everything." Jackson nodded slowly, as if making up his mind about something important. "I reckon I do understand. More than you might think." He placed his hat back on his head. "I've got a proposition for you, Miss Sutton, Sarah Sutton. Miss Sutton, you come work at my ranch. I need help with the cooking and keeping house. You'll have a roof over your head, food for you and your little one, and wages besides." He looked her straight in the eyes. "You walk away from these church steps as my family, not alone. That's my offer." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you help a stranger?" "Because I know what it's like to have nothing," he answered simply. "And no child should be without their mother if there's another way." Sarah looked down at her baby daughter, then back at the tall cowboy. "I don't know the first thing about ranch life." A hint of a smile crossed Jackson's face. "You'll learn. We all do." He extended his hand. What do you say, Miss Sutton?" With trembling fingers, Sarah reached for the basket, lifting her daughter into her arms once more. The weight felt right, natural. She drew a deep breath and nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you." Jackson Forrester's wagon was simple but sturdy, with a small space in the back lined with hay and covered with a tarp for protection against the elements. He helped Sarah climb up to the wooden seat before taking the reins himself. "It's about an hour's ride," he explained as the horses began to move. "Hope that's not too much for the little one." Sarah adjusted her hold on the baby. "She'll be fine." After a moment she added, "Her name is Emily." Jackson nodded approvingly. "Strong name. How old is she?" 3 months, Sarah replied, gazing down at her daughter's face, peaceful in sleep despite the gentle rocking of the wagon. "She was born in July." They traveled in silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking as they left the small town of Redemption behind. Sarah found herself studying her unexpected benefactor from the corner of her eye. Jackson Forrester appeared to be in his early 30s, with a straight back and capable hands that handled the reins with practiced ease. There was a quietness to him that seemed born of solitude rather than shyness. "You live alone, Mr. Forrester," she ventured finally. "Jackson," he corrected gently. "And yes, just me these past few years. Had a ranch hand, old fellow named Pete, but he passed last winter. Been managing on my own since then, but it's getting to be too much." Sarah nodded, understanding now why he'd been so quick to offer her a position. "I'm sorry for your loss. Was he family?" "Close enough," Jackson replied. "Known him since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. He taught me near everything I know about cattle." He glanced at her. "What about you? Any family besides Emily?" Sarah shook her head, her throat tightening. My parents died when I was 16. I've been on my own since then, working as a seamstress mostly. She hesitated before adding, Emily's father was passing through town with a cattle drive, made promises he never intended to keep. Jackson's jaw tightened slightly, but he simply nodded. That happens too often. I thought I could manage, Sarah continued, feeling a need to explain herself. But winter's coming and work's been scarce. The boarding house raised their rates and, she trailed off, the memory of her desperate decision at the church steps still raw. You don't need to explain, Jackson assured her. We all face hard times. What matters is you're doing right by her now. As they continued along the rutted road, the landscape opened up into rolling grasslands, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional stand of cottonwoods. In the distance, Sarah could see the outline of foothills rising toward mountains still touched with early snow. It's beautiful, she remarked, surprised by the sudden feeling of openness after months of confinement in her tiny rented room. Jackson's expression softened. That it is. Not everyone sees it, but I wouldn't trade this land for anything. He pointed ahead. See that line of trees? That's Cottonwood Creek, runs through my property. Best water in the territory. As they approached, Sarah could make out a modest house nestled among the trees, with several outbuildings behind it. A small herd of cattle grazed in a nearby pasture, and a corral held 3 horses who lifted their heads curiously as the wagon approached. It's not much, Jackson said, a note of apology in his voice, but it's solid and warm. House has 2 bedrooms. You and Emily can take the larger one. I'll bunk in the smaller room. I can't take your bedroom, Sarah protested. It's no trouble. Been sleeping on the sofa half the time anyway, Jackson assured her. As the wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, he added, Welcome to Forrester Ranch, Miss Sutton. The house was simple but neat, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, complete with a large stone fireplace. A narrow hallway led to the 2 bedrooms and a small washroom. The furniture was sturdy and practical rather than decorative, clearly built for function over beauty. Jackson showed Sarah to the larger bedroom, which contained a bed with a surprisingly comfortable-looking mattress, a chest of drawers, and a small rocking chair by the window. This will be perfect for you and Emily, he said, lingering awkwardly in the doorway. There's fresh linens in the drawer there. I'll bring in water for washing up, and then I'll get started on supper. You don't need to cook, Sarah said quickly. That's why I'm here, isn't it? To help with the household tasks? Jackson looked uncertain. You've had a long day. I thought you might want to rest. I'd rather be useful, Sarah insisted, suddenly afraid he might regret his impulsive offer. Please, let me earn my keep. He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. All right. There's eggs and bacon, maybe some biscuits if you're up to it. I'll bring in your things and get some water heated. Left alone with Emily, Sarah sat in the rocking chair, nursing her daughter and trying to process the dramatic turn her life had taken in just a few hours. That morning, she had awakened in her tiny rented room, facing eviction and contemplating the unthinkable. Now she sat in a comfortable bedroom in a sturdy house, with the promise of food and wages. We'll be all right, she whispered to Emily. I won't let you down again. By the time Emily had finished nursing and fallen back asleep, Jackson had brought in Sarah's small bag of belongings in the baby's basket. Sarah placed Emily carefully on the center of the large bed, surrounding her with pillows, then made her way to the kitchen. Jackson was stoking the fire in the cast-iron stove, his back to her. There's eggs in that bowl, bacon in the pantry, he said without turning around. Flour and such in the cupboard if you want to make biscuits. Sarah set to work, grateful for something familiar to do. She worked quickly and efficiently, and soon the small house filled with the comforting smell of cooking food. Jackson busied himself with bringing in more firewood and filling the water reservoir attached to the stove. They ate together at the small table, the silence between them not entirely uncomfortable. Sarah found herself watching Jackson covertly as he ate with the focused attention of a man accustomed to working hard for his meals. This is good, he said after a while. Real good. Been eating my own cooking too long. Thank you for giving us a chance, Sarah replied softly. I won't let you down. Jackson looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers directly. I believe you. He set down his fork. First thing tomorrow, I'll ride into town and let Reverend Thomas know you're here, so no one thinks you've abandoned your baby, and I'll pick up some supplies for the little one. Sarah blinked back sudden tears. You've thought of everything. Just trying to do right, Jackson replied, looking slightly uncomfortable with her gratitude. He stood up, taking his plate to the wash basin. I'll clean up. You should get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed with Emily sleeping beside her, Sarah stared up at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the countryside, the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional hoot of an owl, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. It was quieter than town, yet somehow fuller with sound, more alive. She thought of Jackson Forrester, this stranger who had saved her from making the worst mistake of her life. His kindness seemed genuine, but Sarah had learned the hard way that men's intentions were not always what they appeared. Still, she had few options, and something in his steady gaze had earned her trust, at least provisionally. One day at a time, she whispered to herself. That's all we can do. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through the calico curtains and the smell of coffee wafting from the kitchen. Sarah dressed quickly and found Jackson already up, tending to the fire in the stove. Hope I didn't wake you, he said, straightening up. Coffee's hot if you want some. Thank you, Sarah replied, accepting the mug he offered. Emily should sleep a bit longer. I can make breakfast before she wakes. Jackson nodded, reaching for his hat. I need to check on the cattle first. Take your time. He paused at the door. There's a list on the table of things we need from town. Anything you or the baby need, just add it on. After he left, Sarah inspected the kitchen more thoroughly, taking inventory of the supplies and getting a sense of what would be needed. The pantry was decently stocked but lacked variety. She added several items to Jackson's list, then set about making a simple breakfast of oatmeal and dried apples. When Jackson returned, his boots muddy and his face ruddy from the morning chill, Emily had awakened. Sarah had her cradled in one arm while she stirred the pot with her free hand. Here, Jackson said, approaching with his arms outstretched. Let me hold her while you finish up. Sarah hesitated only briefly before passing Emily to him. Jackson handled the baby with surprising confidence, cradling her small body against his chest. Hello there, Miss Emily, he said softly. Welcome to your new home. Something about the sight of her tiny daughter in the cowboy's strong arms made Sarah's heart twist strangely. She turned back to the stove, blinking rapidly. You've handled babies before? She asked, trying to sound casual. Had 3 younger siblings, Jackson explained, gently bouncing Emily when she began to fuss. Ma needed all the help she could get. He smiled down at the infant. Been a while, but some things you don't forget. Over breakfast, Jackson outlined his plans for the day. I'll head into town after I fix that loose board on the chicken coop. Probably be gone most of the afternoon. Is there anything I should do while you're gone? Sarah asked. Nothing pressing. Maybe just get settled in, learn where everything is. He hesitated. There's a small garden plot out back. Not much growing now. But you're welcome to plan what you might want to plant come spring. The casual mention of spring, the assumption that she and Emily would still be here months from now, caught Sarah by surprise. It had been so long since she'd been able to think beyond the next day or week. I'd like that, she said softly. True to his word, Jackson departed for town shortly before noon, leaving Sarah and Emily alone at the ranch. After feeding and changing her daughter, Sarah spent the afternoon exploring her new home more thoroughly. The house was simple but solidly built, with tight windows and a roof that showed no signs of leaking luxuries compared to some of the places she had lived. Outside, she discovered the garden Jackson had mentioned, as well as a small orchard of apple trees, most still bearing late fruit. The chicken coop housed a dozen healthy-looking hens, and a smokehouse stood nearby, currently empty but ready for the fall butchering. Everything spoke of careful management by someone who knew how to make the most of limited resources. It was a far cry from the desperate poverty she'd feared for herself and Emily, or the institutional charity of an orphanage that might have awaited her daughter had she gone through with leaving her at the church. Sarah was hanging freshly washed diapers on the clothesline when she heard the wagon returning. Jackson had several packages and a small wooden crate in the back. "Got everything on the list," he announced as he climbed down. "And Reverend Thomas sends his regards, says he's pleased to hear you found a situation." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "What exactly did you tell him?" "Just that you'd come to work at the ranch and had your baby with you," Jackson replied, lifting the crate down carefully. "Didn't think your personal business needed sharing." He set the crate on the ground. "This here's a cradle. Widow Jensen had it in her attic from when her children were small. Said we could have it." "That's very kind," Sarah said, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you." Jackson shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "Figured the little one shouldn't sleep in that basket forever." He began unloading the other supplies. "Got some fabric, too. Thought maybe you might want to make some proper baby things." That evening, after Emily was settled in her new cradle and a simple supper had been cleared away, Sarah sat by the fire with needle and thread, transforming one of the lengths of soft flannel into a baby gown. Jackson sat across from her in a worn leather chair, whittling a small piece of wood with practiced hands. "What are you making?" Sarah asked after a comfortable silence had stretched between them. Jackson held up the small piece. "Just a little horse for Emily. Won't be able to play with it for a while yet, but thought she might like to have something made special for her." Sarah's fingers stilled on her sewing. "That's very thoughtful." He shrugged, returning to his carving. "Ranch is a lonely place. Nice to have a little one around." After a moment, he added more quietly, "Always thought I'd have a passel of kids by now." "You never married?" Sarah asked, immediately regretting the personal question, but Jackson didn't seem offended. "Nearly did once. Julia was her name. She was the school teacher here about 5 years back." His knife continued its steady work on the wooden horse. "She couldn't abide ranch life, though. Too quiet, too much work for too little reward," she said. "Went back east when her contract ended." "I'm sorry," Sarah offered. Jackson looked up, a wry smile crossing his face. "Don't be. She was right about the work, at least. Ranch life isn't easy, especially for a woman used to city conveniences." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Sarah assured him, wanting him to know she understood what she was getting into. "And I've never had many conveniences to miss." Jackson studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "No, I don't expect you're the type to shy away from difficulty, Miss Sutton." "Sarah," she corrected gently, "if we're to be family, as you put it, perhaps you should call me Sarah." Something flickered in his eyes at the word family, but he nodded. "Sarah it is then." The days fell into a rhythm as autumn deepened toward winter. Sarah quickly adapted to the routine of ranch life, rising before dawn, preparing hearty meals to sustain them through long days of physical labor, tending to the household tasks that had clearly been neglected in the absence of a woman's touch. Jackson worked from sunup to sundown, managing the small herd of cattle, repairing fences, and preparing the ranch for the coming winter. He was a man of few words, but constant action, his capable hands never still for long. Despite his initial awkwardness, he showed surprising gentleness with Emily, often holding her in the evenings while Sarah prepared supper, talking to the infant in a low, soothing voice about his day's work or telling her stories about the land they lived on. "This valley's been home to the Forrester family for 20 years now," he told Emily one evening while Sarah kneaded bread dough nearby. "My pa brought us here when I was just 10 years old. Nothing but wild country back then, but he saw something in this land that others missed." "Your parents aren't living?" Sarah asked, realizing how little she still knew about the man who had taken them in. Jackson shook his head. "Pa died 8 years ago. Heart just gave out one day while he was mending fence. Ma followed a year later. Folks said it was pneumonia, but I always thought she just didn't want to go on without him." "And your siblings?" "Brother Thomas runs a dry goods store in Denver now. Sister Mary married a doctor in Cheyenne." Youngest brother Adam got the wanderlust. Last I heard, he was working a silver mine in Nevada. Jackson adjusted Emily in his arms as she began to fuss. We write sometimes, but everyone's got their own lives now. It must be lonely for you, Sarah observed. Jackson looked up, his gaze direct. It was. Less so now. The simple statement, delivered without embellishment or expectation, warmed something in Sarah that had been cold for too long. As November brought the first lasting snow, the ranch became a white blanketed island of warmth and activity. Sarah found herself looking forward to the evenings by the fire, with Emily sleeping peacefully in her cradle and Jackson's steady presence across from her. Sometimes they talked about the ranch, about books they had read, about the changing seasons. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, each absorbed in their own tasks but aware of the other. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Sarah realized something had changed between them. Jackson was showing her how to repair a bridle, his hands occasionally covering hers to guide her movements. The casual touch sent an unexpected warmth through her, and when she looked up to thank him, she found his face closer than she expected, his blue eyes intent on hers. For a breathless moment, Sarah thought he might kiss her. Instead, he cleared his throat and moved back, continuing the lesson in a slightly rougher voice than before. That night, lying awake with Emily sleeping beside her, Sarah confronted the realization that she was developing feelings for Jackson Forrester, feelings that went beyond gratitude for his kindness or appreciation of his integrity. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She had trusted unwisely before, and the stakes were even higher now that she had Emily to consider. Yet Jackson had shown nothing but respect and consideration since the day they met. He worked tirelessly to provide for them, never complained about the added burden of supporting a woman and child, and treated Emily with a tenderness that sometimes brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered to the darkness, receiving only Emily's soft breathing in response. The question remained unanswered as winter settled in earnest around the ranch. December brought holidays that Sarah had not expected to celebrate. Jackson surprised her by returning from town with a small pine tree, which they decorated with strings of dried berries and simple ornaments he had carved from wood. "Emily's first Christmas should be proper," he explained when Sarah expressed surprise at his sentimentality. On Christmas morning, Sarah presented Jackson with a new shirt she had sewn from fabric, purchased with her carefully saved wages. His genuine pleasure at the gift made her cheeks warm with pride. "I have something for you too," he said, retrieving a small package from behind the tree. Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. "It's not new," he admitted as Sarah stared at it in wonder. "It was my mother's. Thought maybe you might like to put a lock of Emily's hair inside." Jackson. "I can't accept this," Sarah protested. "It should go to your future wife someday." A strange expression crossed his face. "I'd like you to have it," he said simply. "Please." Unable to refuse the earnestness in his eyes, Sarah allowed him to fasten the locket around her neck, his calloused fingers brushing against her skin with unexpected gentleness. "Thank you," she whispered, touching the silver pendant. "I'll treasure it always." Something shifted between them after Christmas, a quiet acknowledgement of feelings neither was yet ready to name. Jackson began finding small excuses to be near her, helping with dishes when he'd previously left her to manage the kitchen alone, lingering over breakfast to tell her about his plans for the day, bringing her wildflowers he found while checking the pastures. Sarah, for her part, found herself watching for his return whenever he rode out, taking special care with meals she knew he enjoyed, and sometimes catching herself smiling for no reason other than the memory of something he'd said. Emily, now 6 months old, thrived in the stable environment. She had begun sitting up on her own and babbling in earnest, her personality emerging more each day. Jackson doted on her, carving toys and spending time each evening playing with her on the rug before the fire. "She's got your smile," he observed one evening as Emily giggled at the wooden horse he was trotting across the floor for her amusement. "And her father's eyes," Sarah replied without thinking, then tensed, realizing she rarely spoke of Emily's father. Jackson was quiet for a moment. Does he know about her? Sarah shook her head. He was gone before I knew I was expecting. Back to Texas with the herd. His loss, Jackson said firmly, tickling Emily's chin until she laughed again. Any man would be proud to call this little one his daughter. The warmth in his voice made Sarah wonder if he was including himself in that statement. She had noticed how he introduced Emily to visitors or townspeople with a proprietary pride that suggested a deeper connection than merely employer and employee's child. January brought harsh blizzards that kept them housebound for days at a time. During one particularly fierce storm, Sarah awoke in the night to find Emily burning with fever, her small body racked with coughs. Terrified, she carried the sick infant to Jackson's room, knocking frantically at his door. He appeared immediately, his hair disheveled from sleep but his eyes alert. "She's so hot," Sarah explained, her voice trembling. "And the cough, I don't know what to do." Jackson touched Emily's forehead, his expression grim. "Might be croup. My sister Mary had it as a child." He moved decisively toward the kitchen. "We need to get some steam going, helps with the breathing, and willow bark tea for the fever." Through the long night, they worked together to ease Emily's distress. Jackson heated water on the stove, creating a steamy environment in the small kitchen, while Sarah held her daughter close, singing softly and offering sips of the willow bark tea Jackson had prepared. As dawn approached, Emily's fever began to break, her breathing easing as she fell into a more peaceful sleep. Exhausted, Sarah leaned back in the rocking chair, her own eyes drifting shut despite her determination to remain vigilant. She awoke some time later to find herself covered with a blanket, Emily no longer in her arms. Panicked, she jumped up, only to find Jackson sitting by the stove, the baby sleeping peacefully against his chest. "She's better," he whispered, seeing Sarah's alarm. "Fever's down. Thought you could use some rest." Relief flooded through her, followed by a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Without thinking, she crossed to where Jackson sat and pressed a kiss to his weathered cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Jackson's free hand came up to capture hers, holding it against his chest where Emily slept. "You're not alone anymore, Sarah," he said quietly. "Remember that." The intimacy of the moment, born of shared concern and relief, lingered between them as January gave way to February. Emily recovered fully, showing no lasting effects from her illness, but Sarah found herself forever changed by the experience of facing her child suffering with Jackson by her side. One evening, as a rare February thaw allowed them to sit on the porch after supper, Emily already asleep in her cradle inside, Sarah finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind for months. "Why did you really help us that day?" she asked, watching Jackson's profile in the fading light. "The truth, please." He was silent for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and reflective. "When I saw you on those church steps, about to leave your baby behind, I saw someone at the end of their rope, someone who thought they had no other choice." He turned to look at her directly. "I know what that feels like. After my parents died, I nearly lost this place, came close to giving up more than once." He looked out across the land that had been his family's legacy. "But this ranch, it saved me, gave me purpose when I needed it most. I thought maybe it could do the same for you and Emily." "Is that all?" Sarah pressed gently, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. Jackson's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. "No," he admitted. "There was something about you, even then, a strength under all that fear. I admired it." He hesitated. "And I'd been alone too long. The house was too quiet. Thought maybe having someone else around would be good for me." "And has it been?" Sarah asked, her heart beating faster. "Good for you?" Jackson turned to her then, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "Better than I could have imagined," he said simply. "You and Emily, you've brought life back to this place, back to me." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Sarah found herself moving from her chair to stand before him, drawn by a certainty she hadn't felt in years. "Jackson," she said softly, I need to know something. Anything. When you told me I'd walk away from those church steps as your family, what did you mean? Just an employee? Or something more? Jackson stood slowly, his height making him tower over her in the gathering dusk. I meant whatever you needed it to mean, he said carefully. At first I just wanted to help, but now... Now? Sarah prompted, hardly daring to breathe. Now I can't imagine this place without you in it, Jackson admitted. Either of you. These past months, watching you with Emily, seeing how hard you work, how much you love her. He broke off, seeming to struggle for words. I've come to care for you both more than I thought possible. Sarah felt something tight in her chest finally release. I've come to care for you too, she whispered, more than I should, perhaps. Why shouldn't you? Jackson asked, his hand coming up to touch her cheek tentatively. Because I brought nothing to this arrangement but problems, Sarah replied. A woman with a baby, no money, no prospects. You brought everything, Jackson interrupted, his voice fierce now. Life, laughter, purpose. You brought Emily, who's as precious to me now as if she were my own. And you brought yourself, Sarah Sutton, which is more than enough for any man with sense to recognize it. The sincerity in his words broke through the last of Sarah's defenses. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly as his thumb brushed across her cheekbone. I'm afraid, she confessed. I trusted wrongly before, made poor choices. I'm not asking you to forget the past, Jackson said gently, just to consider a future, here, with me. His hand moved to cradle the back of her head. I love you, Sarah. I think I started falling the day I found you on those church steps, though I was too stubborn to admit it to myself until much later. Jackson, Sarah breathed, her heart so full she could barely speak. I love you too. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home, a sensation Sarah had nearly forgotten was possible. His lips were gentle but sure against hers, his arms strong and steady as they wrapped around her. Marry me, he murmured against her mouth. Be my wife in truth, not just in the story we've been telling the town. Let me be a father to Emily. Sarah pulled back slightly to see his face, finding nothing there but honest devotion. Are you certain? Emily isn't your blood. She's yours, Jackson said simply, and I love everything that's yours. Besides, he added with a small smile, she's had my heart since the first time she wrapped her tiny hand around my finger. Sarah felt tears of joy spring to her eyes. Yes, she whispered, yes, I'll marry you, Jackson Forrester. Their wedding took place in April, when the prairie was beginning to green and wildflowers dotted the hills. The ceremony was held at Redemption Church, the same church where they had first met, with Reverend Thomas officiating and most of the town in attendance. Emily, now 9 months old and trying her first wobbly steps, was the center of attention in a dress Sarah had lovingly created from the finest fabric she could afford. Jackson had insisted on buying Sarah a proper wedding ring, despite her protests that his mother's locket was gift enough. You deserve something that's just yours, he had said firmly. Something that shows everyone you're chosen, not just taken in out of charity. As they exchanged vows before the altar, Sarah thought about how far she had come from that desperate day in October. The woman who had stood on these steps preparing to abandon her child could never have imagined the joy that awaited her just months later. I, Jackson, take you, Sarah, to be my lawfully wedded wife. Jackson's strong voice carried through the church, steady and certain. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. When it was her turn, Sarah's voice trembled only slightly as she made the same promises. As she spoke the final words, she felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged with this good man who had seen value in her when she couldn't see it in herself. The reception was held at the ranch, where neighbors and townspeople gathered to celebrate with food, music, and dancing under a canopy of spring stars. Jackson had spent weeks preparing, enlisting help to make the place worthy of a wedding celebration. As evening fell, he found Sarah sitting on the porch, taking a moment's respite from the festivities. Emily had finally succumbed to exhaustion and was sleeping in their bedroom under the watchful eye of widow Jensen. "Happy, Mrs. Forrester?" Jackson asked, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "More than I ever thought possible," Sarah replied honestly. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and find this has all been a dream." "Not a dream," Jackson assured her, lifting her hand to kiss her palm. "Though I sometimes feel the same way." He gazed out at their guests, still dancing in the yard to the fiddle music provided by one of the neighboring ranchers. "I never expected to have this a wife, a daughter, a real family." "Nor did I," Sarah admitted. "After Emily's father left, I thought that was the end of any chance for happiness." "His loss was my gain," Jackson said simply, "and I aim to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing to stay with me that day." "I've never regretted it," Sarah assured him, "not for a single moment." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the celebration continue as twilight deepened into night. Sarah found herself reflecting on the strange turns life could take, how the darkest moment of her life had led directly to the brightest. "What are you thinking about?" Jackson asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About fate," Sarah replied. "About how close I came to making the worst mistake of my life that day. If you hadn't come along when you did." "But I did," Jackson reminded her gently. "And you were brave enough to take a chance on a stranger with a wild proposition." He smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. "I'd say we both got lucky that day." "More than lucky," Sarah agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Blessed." As the last guests departed and quiet settled over the ranch once more, Jackson and Sarah checked on Emily, finding her still sleeping peacefully in her crib. Standing together in the moonlight filtering through the bedroom window, they marveled at the perfect little person who had brought them together. "She'll need siblings," Jackson observed casually, his arm tightening around Sarah's waist. "Someone to share this place with when she's older." Sarah turned in his embrace, a smile playing at her lips. "Are you already planning to expand our family, Mr. Forrester?" "Just thinking ahead," he replied, his eyes twinkling with promise. "This land was meant for children to run free on. My father always said a home isn't complete without the sound of little feet." "I think your father was a wise man," Sarah murmured, rising on tiptoe to press a kiss to his lips. "And I think Emily would make an excellent big sister." Later, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Sarah nestled against Jackson's chest, listening to the steady beating of his heart. Outside, a gentle spring rain began to fall, pattering against the roof in a soothing rhythm. "Thank you," she whispered into the quiet. "For what?" Jackson asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "For stopping me that day. For giving us a chance at a real life together." Sarah propped herself up on one elbow to look into his face, just visible in the faint light from the banked fire. "For loving Emily as your own." Jackson reached up to touch her cheek, his expression tender. "Loving Emily is the easiest thing I've ever done," he said softly. "And loving you that's as natural as breathing." In that moment, with her husband's arms around her and her daughter sleeping peacefully nearby, Sarah felt a sense of completion that had eluded her for so long. The journey from those church steps to this place had been unexpected, sometimes difficult, but ultimately perfect in its own way. "I love you, Jackson Forrester," she whispered, settling back against his chest. "Thank you for making us a family." His arms tightened around her, his lips pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Always," he promised. "From that day on the church steps until forever, you and Emily are my family. And nothing will ever change that." As Sarah drifted toward sleep, safe in the embrace of the man who had become her unexpected salvation, she knew that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together. The woman who had almost lost everything, the cowboy who had offered a new beginning, and the child who had brought them together. From the depths of despair on those church steps had grown a love stronger than she had ever dared to imagine, and a family bound together, not by blood, but by choice and devotion. Outside, the rain continued to fall, nourishing the land that had become their home, promising renewal and growth in the seasons to come, just as the love that had bloomed between them promised a lifetime of happiness for the family that began with a simple offer on the steps of Redemption Church. "You'll walk away as my family," he had said that day, and so they had.